IIFYM is really about hitting your macros no matter what you eat, whereas flexible dieting is about selecting foods to serve your lifestyle, your goals, your values for multiple dietary variables that may include macros, but also many other things that support how you feel and perform. Wits and Weights community, welcome to another solo episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. In our last episode 109, lifting weights at any age on a platform of strength with Andrew Romeo, Andrew and I talked about the concept of a platform of strength, making fitness fun, and lots of other topics related to lifting weights at any age. Today for episode 110, macros aren't enough. Flexible dieting versus IIFYM. The battle is on between flexible dieting and if it fits your macros, or IIFYM. You'll discover why the freedom to eat your favorite foods and only tracking macros isn't enough to achieve real life-changing health. I will compare the glaring differences between flexible dieting and IIFYM so you can fuel your body for peak performance, physique, and longevity, and make friends with your food, foods that serve you and your values. So let's jump into the topic. Macros aren't enough. Flexible dieting versus IIFYM. So let me just define IIFYM if it fits your macros. It's an eating style that focuses solely on meeting your daily macro targets. And the concept originated in the online bodybuilding and fitness forums around the late 2000s and early 2010s. Alan Argon has shared this story. I think it's even written about in his book, Flexible Dieting. And it was initially presented as a rebellion against, at the time, were the traditional restrictive bodybuilding bro diet, right? Chicken, rice, and broccoli, a very limited range of foods. And the idea behind IIFYM was simple, like many approaches, like many diets, in fact, as long as you meet your macro targets for the day, your macronutrient targets, the specific foods you eat don't matter. And in fact, they took it to an extreme of really don't matter at all. And the concept gained traction, right? Because it allowed for a more flexible eating style. With IIFYM, you could technically eat fast food, dessert, any other kind of food, quote unquote unhealthy, whatever term you want to use, junk food, etc. Fast food, doesn't matter. I already mentioned that. As long as it fit within the calculated macros for the day, proteins, fats, and carbs. And I think the reason it became a meme or a saying was that people would ask questions on these forums like, hey, can I eat pizza on my diet? And they would say, well, IIFYM, right? If it fits your macros, you can. You could eat anything if it fits your macros. And social media, of course, amplified this like it always does, with fitness influencers, bloggers adopting the method, showing off their indulgent food choices while they have this lean physique, this six-pack, whatever. And you still see this today. In fact, there seems to be a resurgence on social media about or with nutritionists and dietitians who are obviously paid by the big food companies to plug their stuff, not only as if it's okay to eat within a flexible diet, but they actually push it to the point where they say this is a healthy source of nutrition, which is probably a bridge too far. And we're going to scratch all of that today and get to a truly flexible approach is where I want to take you that aligns with you. And while IIFYM has been criticized for lacking in other things, like you don't think about nutritional quality, you don't think about density or fullness or anything, it still remains very popular and oftentimes is interchanged with the term flexible dieting because of the psychological benefits. So if you, for example, were used to eating restrictive diets, let's say keto, carnivore, something like that, where you've cut a bunch of foods out, and now you have the mindset of, well, I can really eat anything, but now I'm tracking my calories and macros, so I'm going to make it fit. That's actually a nice step along the way, along the spectrum, I'll say, toward where you eventually want to be. And it probably has more psychological alignment than the yo-yo dieting that you get from restrictive diets. So I'm not totally bashing the idea as a foundation, but it's not everything. In fact, it's not anywhere close to everything. And I want to get into these today. So, and here's why I slightly defend IIFYM at the beginning is because I went through that process myself. When I was first tracking I tried to track multiple times in my life, and the first few times didn't really take. But when I finally started tracking using Macro Factor and actually got feedback on my metabolism, and then I knew how to adjust my macros each week, I really wasn't thinking too much beyond macros. And yet that took me 80% of the way to where I needed to be, until I hit my first fat loss phase. And I realized that you really want to think about more than macros if you're going to stick with the phase, if you're going to be adherent, if you're going to be successful, and if you're going to have a bunch of other things regarding your health and energy and performance met and satisfied by what you are eating. So it was a nice stepping stone toward discovering all of that for me. And so I thank it for that, but it's not enough. And that's what I want to get into today. And here's why. If it fits your macros, overlooks a lot of things. It overlooks micronutrients, your vitamins, your minerals. It overlooks fiber. It overlooks saturated fat. It overlooks even hydration. Like there's things that aren't even technically food, so to speak, that it doesn't really consider. It has nothing to do with meal timing or supporting your training and activity and all these other things that we're going to get into. Micros, for example, directly affect your training, your recovery, your immune system, your overall well-being. And right off the bat, if you're simply picking foods because they meet your macros and nothing else, you're going to have a deficiency there. Studies have indicated that if you only focus on macros, you're probably, because if you've come from a traditional Western diet, you're probably going to have a diet low in fiber and essential nutrients like potassium, vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids. There was a study in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition that argued that while macronutrient targets could be met with diets largely consisting of processed foods, this is going to lead to deficiencies in fiber and other essential nutrients. And I think that was actually a Helms article from 2014, Helms et al. So right off the bat, we can see one of the disadvantages of only thinking about macros. Fiber in particular, I'm a huge advocate of putting that way up there at the same level of your other macros, even though it's a subset of carbs, because it plays such a crucial role in your digestive health. It helps control blood sugar. It's been linked to lower levels of LDL cholesterol. A lack of fiber can give you digestive issues, higher risk of heart disease, poor blood sugar control, and so on. And I just like it for satiety as well when you're in a fat loss phase, and it is associated with more nutrient-dense whole foods. Similarly, if you have too much sodium, too much saturated fat, which is what is found in processed foods that still can quote unquote fit your macros, like you could probably eat pizza every day, all day and fit your macros with the right combinations of ingredients, but it's going to have a lot of salt. It's going to have a lot of saturated fat. It's going to be all sorts of things going to wreak havoc on your system and probably not align with your health. And of course, those have been linked to things like cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and other metabolic issues. So I am a big fan of changing your mindset toward one of flexibility and toward the idea of macros and calories as the first variables, the first set of variables. But then we want to start to include more dietary variables. So that's the phrase I'm going to use, and grow that approach into full flexible dieting. So I'm using the term flexible dieting from here on out to define what we mean when you take a macros approach and then you add the other 10 things on top of it, or variables on top of it, that we really need to align with our goals. And this is why we track things like energy, digestion, your progress in your training, right? And so on, like multiple things regarding biofeedback, regarding our activity, and start tweaking those variables, those dietary variables, based on individual rather than this one size fits all approach, right? Some people already eat plenty of fiber, for example. Others have very little fiber. So somebody who's not eating very much, I'm going to want to track that as a dietary variable pretty early on. If I was working with a client and we were tracking their food, I'm going to be looking at fiber. I'm going to look at saturated fat just out of curiosity, if nothing else. But if I notice that it's far below what we need, that's a great clue as to what kind of food choices and quality they are selecting. And now we can go through the education process of, well, let's increase the fiber because here are the benefits, and here are the types of foods that have a lot of fiber, right? Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, etc. Let's start to add those in right? We're not trying to cut things out. We're trying to add those in. And as we add them in, it's going to take the place of some of the other things in your diet, which may be processed foods or it may just be foods that just have less fiber. Maybe you're eating a ton of protein and you want to back down on the protein and actually increase the fiber, for example. That's unusual, but could be. And so what we're going for here is we don't want nutritional imbalances. We don't want health issues. And so early on, if we start to think of other dietary variables, it will start to guide our food selection. Now, I wanted to give you a quote from the book Flexible Dieting by Alan Argon. Alan was on the show. I don't have the episode off the top of my head, but you can look that up. And I will have a link to his book in the show notes because I highly recommend everyone pick up a copy. It's a super easy read. It's not very long at all. And it can be used as a good reference guide if you ever run into a question like, oh, what do I do for fiber? What do I do for carbs? What if I'm an endurance athlete, right? What about building muscle? What about seed oils and red meat and eggs? All of those things are addressed in there. And so I'm going to read a quote from that book that I think is insightful here, or I guess it defines flexible dieting. Quote, flexible dieting involves individualizing the degree of dietary flexibility or rigidity. It also individualizes the precision of tracking and accountability. So right there, I'm going to stop the quote before I continue. Already you can see flexible dieting is not about macros. It's about you defining what level of flexibility or rigidity you want for yourself and the level of tracking and accountability you want for yourself. Very important because some people confuse this or even my coaching approach with being all about macros, and it really isn't. If you are working with me as a client, we are going to have a fairly high level of precision from tracking and accountability so that we both have data to work from as quickly as possible and get to your results as quickly as possible. But you don't have to do it that way, especially if the approach itself is repelling to you or if the approach itself prevents you from adhering to your plan. Okay. So right there, I wanted to stop the quote and I'm going to continue reading the quote. Some folks can sustain the practice of gram tracking just fine, and some even enjoy it. Although, in my observations, they're in the minority. So perhaps I'm in that minority. Some folks would rather track portions of each food group, as in the traditional exchange system used by dietitians. Other approaches include tracking just protein and total calories, or just protein. There's also the option to not track anything at all in the formal sense. Rather, you just maintain an awareness of your requirements for the least amount of dietary variables that still allows progress or maintenance of progress. This option involves developing your awareness of hunger and satiety cues. Flexible dieting encompasses all of these approaches. End quote. So as we can see, this method goes beyond macros to consider your personal overall dietary pattern, your requirements to get the results you want, and the right level of tracking and precision to get there. And this is why, if you want to do, for example, what I'm doing, or maybe as the time this episode comes out, in the middle of it or done with it, an aggressive fat loss phase, get it over and done in 2 weeks, I have to have an extreme level of tracking and precision to make sure I do that successfully on a short time frame with such a large deficit. But if you're trying to just live at maintenance and get some body recomposition, you could track very little. You could track just protein or not even track at all and just use portions and know that, hey, I'm eating 4 times a day and I have protein every time. And I'm going to eat in a way until I feel full. And I'll eat mostly whole foods, so it's easier to get the hunger signals. And then I will just track my weight every few days or once a week or once a month. And as long as my weight is in the ballpark of what it was last time, I know I'm maintaining my weight and I'm going to train hard and get some body recomp, right? That is an approach. But then if you came to me and said, hey, Philip, I've been doing that, but now I need to lose 20 pounds of excess body fat to get leaner now that I've built muscle. Can I just take this very imprecise tracking approach? And I'm going to say it's very hard to do. It's very hard to do. You can definitely induce some release of fat or some fat loss with a non-tracking approach, but it's going to probably take longer and have plateaus along the way that you could have avoided with more tracking. Okay, so this method does go beyond macros, and it comes down to which dietary variables that you want to track, which is where my provocative title, Macros Aren't Enough, comes from. And I'm going to give you a list of other things that you may also want to track. And by tracking these things, you can then select foods that support meeting these variables. if that makes any sense. And I think I talked about this on another episode of, what was that? It was about like the different things that we can track. I think it was about, I forget the name of the episode, but it was like, what are all the things that we can track for progress? And this is a subset of those things. And if you track these, and by track, I mean you have some sort of target, a minimum or a maximum, and you're trying to hit it most days or get close, because by doing so, it will result in XYZ. Like it results in improved health, it results in improved digestion, and so on. So I'm going to go down the list. The first one's fiber. Again, I think fiber is super important. It's almost like its own macro. The general recommendations are going to be 14 grams per 1,000 calories consumed. So if you consume 2,000 calories, you're aiming to get 28 grams. Now, if you use MacroFactor, and again, if you don't use MacroFactor, download it today, try it out, use my code WITSandWeights, all one word. You get a free trial that way to try it out. MacroFactor has a micronutrient explorer where you can track some of these with targets. So fiber, you can see, is every food or every meal that I'm logging helping me toward my fiber goal. And what's nice about that is at the end of the day or the end of the week, you can look back and say, what did I hit? Right. And I'll do this for a client. I'll look through their fiber data, say, you're getting like 10 grams of fiber a day. That's quite lower than we want to be. We're not ready for a fat loss phase yet until we address that, because in my opinion, you have to have a decent amount of fiber to make fat loss a lot easier for multiple reasons: satiety, food selection, low calorie density, right? And also you kind of get a free, how do I put this? Every gram of fiber has fewer calories than a gram of another type of carb, and yet we log them as grams of carbs. And so the actual calories consumed are going to be less, which may even make it easier to stay in a deficit without quite realizing it, if that makes sense. So fiber is one right there, because then it leads you to select foods that increase your fiber. And I mentioned those before. Those are the classics: vegetables, fruits, whole grains. Those are the big ones. So fiber is number one. The next one is saturated fat, and saturated fat is more of a maximum. We want to keep it at around 10% of our calories or less, or put another way, about a third of our fat intake or less. And again, if you're using MacroFactor, we'll have that for you. And saturated fat, when you consume too much of it, it could tell me that your dietary pattern is full of too many processed foods, for example. Or maybe you're just adding too much butter and oil, butter to your food. It doesn't mean any of those things are bad. Of course, we love eggs, we love butter. They're perfectly fine, whole food, natural foods. It's just a matter of quantities and ratios and dietary pattern. Micronutrients are the next thing. So vitamins and minerals are excellent to track, because again, if you're looking to get enough iron, selenium, potassium, calcium, whatever, that'll lead you to select foods and try to consume them within your lifestyle to get them, rather than relying on supplementation. And generally that leads to a more whole food diet as well. The next thing I like to track is my workout nutrition. Now, how you track this, the way I track it is simply make sure that I'm planning my pre and post workout meals on the days that I train. And for me, it just becomes a routine where I do the same thing every time. So I can copy and paste in my app, and there we go. But my point is, when you eat your proteins and carbs is going to be important for a lot of people, especially when you train really hard and you're worried about your energy, recovery, and building muscle. And so meal prepping and planning for that is part of your flexible dieting strategy, right? Not just hit your macros. It's, I need to hit certain macros, proteins and carbs at certain times of day. And I want to do it in a way where it doesn't mess with my digestion, right? Eating things at the right time, so it's not too soon or too far away from my workouts, and so on. Okay, the next one is energy levels. So this is where we're starting to get into more biofeedback. If you can track biofeedback, say on a weekly basis, which is usually good enough. Some people like to do it daily. But again, going back to Alan Argon's definition, the level of precision is up to you. The level of tracking is up to you. But I think biofeedback once a week is pretty good, because you can look back on the week and say, you know what, my energy this week was pretty poor. Like it was just not good as is normally. And then you can diagnose that, say, well, why is that? Did I have a bunch of extra life stress? Did I not sleep enough? No. And then you can go through the list. Okay, maybe I slept enough. Maybe I don't have any more stress. Why was my energy down? Oh, it looks like I didn't quite hit my carbs this week. And so I want to make sure that at least for my training days or, recovery days, whatever, I have enough carbs, or maybe I want to shift my carbs around. And so that gives you a clue beyond just pure macros as to why you might be lacking energy. Maybe you don't have enough fat, right? Maybe you don't have enough fat and you're hitting your fat target, but the target itself may need to be increased. So this gives you information. So that's energy. The next one is recovery. I'm going to say that's kind of related. Recovery is more, do you feel sore the day of your workouts? Do you feel like fatigued or not when you go into train? Again, all those are affected by what you're eating, when you're eating it, the ratio of your macros. The next one is sleep quality. Similar thing, right? Are you eating too late in the day, or at night? Are you drinking caffeine too late? Are you eating things that are messing up with your digestion? The next item is digestion. Digestion is huge for a lot of people. Are you feeling bloated? This could be a matter of timing, a matter of food choice. Often it is a matter of food choice. It's either an intolerance or more likely it's just foods that have a bunch of ingredients that don't sit well with you, which in my personal experience tend to be more processed foods or foods from a restaurant. They just have extra stuff in there. I don't have to, it's no one ingredient is good or bad, but I mean, if you've got a ton of oil in a dish and you're not used to drenching your food in oil, that could cause digestive issues, right? Or if you're trying to do some sort of intermittent fasting protocol and you're eating too much at one time, or if your work schedule is so hectic you forget to eat and you cram all your food into 2 meals and cause digestive issues, that tells you something about meal timing, food choice, when to eat, and so on. And then the other one is hunger. I mean, definitely track hunger. In fat loss, this is going to be huge, but hunger is going to tell you, along with fiber, can you make different food choices that mitigate hunger? And that could be the actual foods themselves, like having more protein or having more low calorie density foods like vegetables, like high volume fruits, like vegetable soups and broths, like maybe eating harder, less processed foods rather than more soft processed foods. A whole long list of things that have nothing to do with macros and everything to do with hunger and letting you stick to the deficit and get through it without feeling miserable, right? Because when we want to release some weight, we're going to have to go in a deficit and our body's going to tell us that it's working with hunger signals. But you can still mitigate those by, eating frequently enough throughout the day or lowering the frequency, believe it or not. For some people, eating 5 or 6 times a day actually causes ongoing hunger because the meals are not big enough to satisfy the hunger. And so you constantly feel hungry. Whereas if you put it down to, say, 3 meals or even 2 during a fairly aggressive fat loss phase, you might find that actually helps with hunger because now your body gets full when you eat. And then when you're not eating, it's not expecting to eat. So all of that feedback helps you with your flexible dieting approach. So essentially anything that you care about with respect to your lifestyle, your goals, and your values is the essence of sustainability and flexibility, hence the term flexible dieting, so that you can achieve any of these short-term results in the context of your long-term, never-ending lifestyle transformation. So here's the verdict. Okay, when we lay all the facts on the table, it's pretty obvious that if it fits your macros is a very simplistic, incomplete approach, whereas flexible dieting is a more balanced, sustainable, health-conscious approach that aligns with everything you are doing, and it goes beyond macros. It emphasizes a holistic dietary pattern, right? And so for me, that is the clear winner for anyone who's serious about their physique, anyone who's serious about their overall well-being. That's the approach to take. But I'm happy to have kind of dived in today to flexible dieting beyond the idea of just some calorie and macro targets, because it really goes far beyond that. Now, the question is going to be, how do you do flexible dieting in this approach that I'm talking about? Because no, it isn't just track calories and macros, but it is tracking the variables that you care about. So it could be a very minimal set of tracking, or it could be very high precision tracking. That's up to you. So step 1 is to determine what those are. What targets do you care most about? Calories, macros, just one of the macros like protein, fiber, saturated fat, micronutrients, your biofeedback, all of those are the targets. Your training progress, they're all part of your nutrition plan, right? And this is why when people sign on with one-on-one coaching for me, they realize it's not just about food. The food is almost the afterthought of all the other lifestyle changes that we make for the better, right? For the awareness, for the self-awareness and and sustainability. But then you get to decide what targets you want. So that's number one. Then number two, guess what? You track those. You simply track those variables for the calories and macros and food and fiber and micros and all that. You use a food logger like MacroFactor, right? That one app will let you track all of that stuff. And then the rest of it, like biofeedback or your training, you're going to use a journal, a log, a note app on your phone, maybe even put notes right in the in MacroFactor, which has the ability to do that every day. So you can put the notes right there, right? You could put it all in one app. With my clients, we use an app, a special coaching app where they can log these things and then they can journal their progress when they check in for the week. So if you wanted to do that for yourself, you could reach out to me. In fact, I'm happy to share some of the details that I ask my clients for and give you an idea of that so that you can do it yourself. So that's number two. So number one, what dietary variables do you want to track? Number two, go ahead and track those. Number three, choose foods to support those goals. Okay, this is where we start to close the feedback loop. Now, a good rule of thumb just to get started is 80% whole nutrient-dense foods like lean meats, fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, whole grains, and then 10 to 20% whatever the heck else you choose and or want to enjoy, your indulgences. Some people have more propensity to want indulgences or have a sweet tooth and so on than others, right? I've had clients who just eat all whole foods. That's just the way they are. I personally eat way more whole food to indulgences now than I used to, but I still love certain things like ice cream. I love ice cream and I like chocolate, right? It's just things, but I don't have an emotional attachment to these things like I used to. It's more of just, I enjoy them. They taste good. I like the texture and so on. And so I always seek out good quality versions of those, even when they happen. Now, that's not to say that I'm not going to eat something out of a box or a bag occasionally, or more often than you would think. Of course, it fits in there. It fits not only the macros, but it fits my overall goals because 80, 90% of what I'm eating is more than sufficient to check off all the other boxes, right? And that's the flexible approach. So that's number three, choose foods to support those goals. Number four, monitor your results along the way and adjust. So you're tracking your variables, you're choosing foods to support them. Now, the key thing is to see what happens to those. If anything is off where you intend, if the fiber is below your target or the saturated fat's above your target or your hunger is too high or your training progress is stagnating and so on and so forth, that's giving you a clue that perhaps your food choice, your food timing, supplementation, all of that needs to be tweaked somewhere. It may not be the only reason. There are other factors that play like lack of sleep, ineffective training programming and so on, but this is part of the data. And then number five, work with a coach if you want to vastly accelerate the process, or at least join our free Wits and Weights Facebook community. Okay, I couldn't help myself this one because I do know it is so effective to be in a community and to work with others, especially to work with a coach, to just get those results as fast as possible. They will help you. And by they, I mean, it could be an expert that you know who's a friend of yours. It could be a coach you're already working with, a coach that you hire, or a free community that you join, or a paid community, whatever, where everyone is supporting everyone. And you can ask your question and say, hey, these are my goals. What should I track? What kind of foods can I eat to support those, et cetera? How can I track them? And so on. All right. So to recap, determine the targets you care about, track them, choose foods to support reaching those targets, monitor your results along the way and adjust, and then work with a coach and or community to accelerate your progress. There you have it. Pretty simple, right? Flexible dieting is like the wiser, more experienced sibling of If It Fits Your Macros, IIFYM. And they're definitely not the same thing at all. IIFYM is just a tiny piece of that foundation that leads you to this flexible approach. IIFYM is really about hitting your macros no matter what you eat, whereas flexible dieting is about selecting foods to serve your lifestyle, your goals, your values for multiple dietary variables that may include macros, but also many other things that support how you feel and perform. Okay, so we've talked a lot today about how making choices designed around you can dramatically accelerate your progress toward your physique goals. I don't remember who said this, but it goes like this. Information is just potential power. What you really need is tailored strategies that apply specifically to you and your unique situation. And that's why I'm inviting you to a completely free 30-minute results breakthrough session. And I always like to make one thing clear. This is not a sales call. This is about you. We're going to dig deep into what you've been doing, what's been holding you back, and sketch out a roadmap for where you need to go next. We will get to the bottom of what's actually going on. All the stuff we just talked about today, really understand you. No fluff, no nonsense, straight up steps, 1, 2, 3. How do we get from here to there? Because the truth is everybody's body does respond very differently. And the only way to know that what will work for you is to get to those details. So if you're serious about breaking through your plateaus, maybe you're a seasoned lifter or you're just getting started, this breakthrough session I do, these free calls, which I do them every week, there's always space in my calendar. This is your opportunity to fast track that process. Again, that was step 5 of our 5 steps earlier. All you've got to do to claim this is hit the link in the show notes, pick a time, and let's get the ball rolling. No pitch, no catch, just 30 minutes that could potentially change the way that you approach your health and physique forever. All right. In our next episode, 111, the anti-diet athlete mindset with Sherry Shaban. Sherry and I challenge your conventional wisdom on dieting and fitness as we look at why diets fail, the nuances of transformation versus results, and how you can transform your identity into that of an athlete. After all, we are all athletes if we think like one. If you got value from this episode, make sure to rate, review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. And as always, stay strong, and I'll talk to you next time here on the Wits and Weights podcast.